And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo, and we got another great show in store for you. Our guest returning with a new, when Chris Flash is in the studio, it's because a new issue of The Shadow is out, and you can see it behind me. Weed Greed is the name of this issue. You might remember last year we had Chris on talking about this issue, but this is the new issue. So they went from red to green. This is Weed Greed. Weed Greed, and this is Dump Trump. Excellent. So, with no further ado, Chris Flash, welcome to Let Them Talk.
Hey.
Great to have you. Now,
Likewise.
This is a special program because not only is it a new issue of The Shadow, and we had a great event all this weekend, but it's also almost today. Today is the 7th, right? 6th, 7th is the 30th anniversary of the riot in Tompkins Square Park, which didn't happen on one day because it started late at night and went over into the next morning.
Good point. It was the immediate evening of August 6, 1988, but it really was about 12 midnight to 1 a.m., so technically it was August 7th, so technically it's still exactly 30 years ago.
Right, today on the August 7th,
yes.
Right? And today is also the 44th anniversary of Philippe Petit crossing on a wire between the two twin towers.
Wow.
That was 44 years ago.
Did you know
today.
I ran into him one day, many years after that?
Philippe Petit.
On 6th Avenue, there were these two trees right across the street from the Waverly Theater, and it's just below McDougal Street, maybe just right about McDougal Street. And he had this rope going across the two trees, and the rope was maybe 2 feet high, 3 feet high, nothing like the World Trade Center. And he's walking across he's doing a street thing to get money. He's panhandling,
right.
but performing to get money. And there's a quick aside. And I watched him cross the rope barefoot, and I watched his little toe and the next toe were like this, like your fingers like this.
That far apart from each other.
So he wasn't just balancing on he grabbed the rope as he walked on it with those two toes. He was actually gripping the rope as he walked across.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That's how he did the World Trade Center.
Like that?
But that's how he did the World Trade Center, because he wasn't just balancing on this little wire. He was gripping the wire with his toes. We just didn't see it from the height.
Wow.
And that was his secret. I saw that.
I guess that's the secret. Wow.
Anyway,
so that's 44
years. A little New York moment.
So August 6th, right? And if we go 73 years back, it's August 6th is the anniversary bombing of
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Nagasaki on the 9th, and the 6th was the... So it is an interesting date, not a fortuitous date, but definitely a date that seems to have a historical note through the years. So, yes, and so what was the Tompkins Square Park riot? I mean, some of our viewers remember it, were there maybe, but,
Well, this story's been told like multiple times, and I guess it never really gets old if you were there to witness the events. But in a nutshell, the city wanted to create a demographic change on the Lower East Side to pave the way for the gentrification to come, because certain stubborn elements were firmly rooted in the community and couldn't be dislodged. The police were misused by the city, by the administration, to enforce a sort of a police state there. They wanted to get rid of the undesirables in their view, which consisted mainly of homeless people, squatters, anarchists, political activists, those who were community organizers.
Political speech. They wanted to shut down certain political speech they didn't like, which they still do to this day.
There was an atmosphere there of a real free environment where people paid low rent, but people were politically active. And we did have a community, city council member who at the time I didn't really respect because I was just an angry guy in his 20s. And I came to respect her later, Miriam Freelander. And later I realized she practically single-handedly maintained rent control on the Lower East Side from the 70s, like 73 when she got in, till like 92 when she was ousted.
Which is why they hated her so much.
So almost single-handedly, and I even saw her one day before she died. She was in Tompkins Square Park in her 90s, and she was a little feeble. And she saw me approaching her, and she was a little taken aback. And I said, no, I'm not here. I just wanted to say...
I'm not here to protest.
I apologized for any negativity toward her in the heat of the moment during riot days of the 80s. And I said, I realized every good thing you did for us. I want to thank you. And she just nodded and smiled because she really couldn't talk too much. But at least I was able to convey that to her. Right. So they wanted to basically change the demographics of the Lower East Side. And so somebody somewhere had secret meetings not just the one secret meeting that we reported in the shadow, thanks to you giving us the secret list.
I got the list of people who were at the secret meeting.
The meeting they denied.
The secret list of the secret meeting.
Right, the meeting they denied took place. But we found that there were certain elements in the community that wanted to create a curfew in the park. There was no legal curfew, nothing codified, nothing official. somebody with yellow paint wrote on all of the entrances to Tompkins Square Park. They considered Tompkins Square Park as the linch point of their strategy.
They still do. It really, the idea is to make the housing right around the edges of it very high.
Kind of ground zero, and then from there expanding outward.
The Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, still has these kind of ideas, and he's already bought at least one building on there, on the park, right?
He's more than one building.
Yeah, facing on the park.
So somebody in yellow lettering painted, "Park closes at midnight," and of course that was bold because there was no real curfew, and someone decided. So at some point, the head of the 9th Precinct, Gerald McNamara, decided that the park would close at 1 o'clock in the morning from then on. Mm-hmm. And again, there was no official curfew anywhere. And those days, I don't think the city had any curfew in the city parks. Am I wrong? In 1988?
There was an unenforced law. You have to realize just because there's a law on the books that's been there for 100 years doesn't mean it can be just enforced tomorrow without any discussion.
And vice versa,
there's a certain element of if you don't enforce a law for 100 years, you can't just tomorrow decide you're going to start enforcing it.
But the other side of the coin is true. If there is no law in the first place, you can't just arbitrarily say, well, it's closing at midnight, get out.
Right. There should have been.
You can't do that. You can't have both ways.
To me, the central thing was that Pagan waited, and his supporters waited until Miriam Friedlander was away on vacation that summer, visiting her son in California.
Just explain who Antonio Pagan was.
Right, and he was, we'll get to that, and he was a person who obviously opposed Miriam Friedlander and was a tool of the landlords at the time, the real estate developers, and he went behind the back of the community and worked together with the police with no community input, no community notice, to achieve this curfew at the park and to shut it down. And they wanted to do it and make it a fait accompli before the councilwoman Miriam Friedlander returned from her vacation. It would have been all over. That was the plan.
Who was the owner of the Amsterdam News at the time? Do you remember?
Yes, but can't think of his name. But
okay, I can't think of his name either. But he and David Dinkins launched Antonio Pagan as they sponsored him as a member of the community board, and then in his position as member of the community board, as Paul just demonstrated. Pagan was supported by real estate interests and gentrifiers in the neighborhood. They basically want to divide the neighborhood against itself in order to pave the way for real estate development and gentrification. And Pagan did that secret meeting on behind the backs of most community board members who were away for vacation in August. A very hot night in August is when the riot took place. But
it was really hotter than the last few days.
The plans were in place before then. We had a miniature riot on July 31 where police came into the park and they started beating people up randomly, scattering them out of the park, announcing there was a curfew.
It's amazingly random, wasn't it? It was very random.
It was just sudden.
Whoever they just came in out of nowhere, told nobody anything, and just started grabbing people.
They just came in and said, get out, park's closed. And people were like, well, fuck.
They thought that would work.
They were like, basically, people protested and rebelled and fought back a little bit, but there weren't enough of us, and there were enough of them to kick us out of the park.
That night, the week before.
Right. So now, a very interesting thing starts happening. If you ever see the movie West Side Story, in West Side Story, they're singing about the rumble that's going to come later on, like in the next day or two. There's going to be this rumble. Tonight.
Right. Everybody's talking about the rumble.
So the Jets are getting ready. The Sharks are getting ready. They're building up their weapons. They're getting their manpower in place. Everyone's getting ready for the big rumble they know is going to take place the following Saturday. Yeah. So between July 31, the day of the miniature riot, the night of the miniature riot, to August 6th, the night of the big riot, the police had a command center put inside Tompkins Square Park. They had cops on horseback doing maneuvers. They had police on foot doing maneuvers.
They had helicopters.
They were doing all kinds of paramilitary maneuvers.
All giant lighting things.
In our neighborhood with police vehicles surrounding the park to basically make a big presence. We're coming. We're going to kick your ass and try to do something about it. Now, quietly, Viet Minh style, the community members were getting ready for what they expected to be a major rumble. They didn't display their forces. They didn't show outwardly how we were going to respond to this aggression. But quietly, people were organizing, preparing for what was to come that Saturday. So that Saturday night, August 6, 1988, there was a demonstration against the curfew in Tompkins Square Park. The demonstration wended its way into the park, outside of the park, back into the park, outside of the park, and the police were just standing by.
In a way, they won because I remember Jerry was leading the demonstration, and he was getting bored marching around in front of these cops and saying, "I don't like to do this," and they marched out of the park.
Tactically, that was a really stupid move. People should have stayed in the park, and by 1 o'clock, they would have been in the park. For some stupid reason, the people leading the march led the marchers out of the park at 1 a.m. As soon as you heard it was 1 a.m., the police didn't say, okay, the park's closed. They didn't read the Riot Act, which they're supposed to do. You have a chance to get out of the street before we arrest you. You have a chance to disperse before we arrest you. No Riot Act, no warning, just 1 o'clock, boom, 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 and it was all mayhem. All hell broke loose. Now, some people jumped over the fence, got back into the park.
Yeah.
It was just mayhem, and there was no
What happened
command.
inside? Were people inside the park during the riot? I was
Some
on the
people were
street.
in the park. I was at the corner of St. Mark's and A when at 1 o'clock when it all broke loose.
All
I
I
was
know
right
is
there.
if the authorities wanted to close down the park, why, after they closed the park, did they engage in a wild battle and melee in the streets of the city?
Because it was a rumble. It
was a rumble.
It wasn't enforcing
It was a
law.
rumble.
Again,
it was like the Sharks and the Jets.
yes, there was no law.
It was old New York.
There was no curfew, no actual curfew. They decided, we're making a curfew. We're going to kick your ass if you go and against our curfew. Forget about this.
It was like a fight between a gang. The cops were like a gang, a street gang in a way.
Another analogy is like the U.S. going into Vietnam. Because I love that analogy because the Viet Cong had everything to fight for. They were fighting for their very survival, their community, their land, their homes, their farms. They were living there for how many generations? Countless generations. And the American aggressors, the invaders, the occupiers had nothing to fight for. There's a great line in Apocalypse Now. The revised version.
Yeah.
I can't pronounce this properly. Redux? R-E-D-U-X?
Yeah, Redux.
When Francis Ford Coppola was able to add in all the footage he was forced to cut out in 1979 because they were pressuring him to release the damn film. It had taken so long to come out. Like 20 years later, he puts in all the lost footage. And there's a French scene. And the French guy is saying to Martin Sheen, he says, us French are fighting for everything. This is ours. You Americans are fighting for the biggest nothing in history. And I think about that. What were the police really fighting for in Tompkins Park? They were being used as soldiers.
They weren't even from there. They were coming in from the Bronx
all
and Brooklyn.
These different boroughs.
They had no idea where they were half the time.
No, and there was no command control. They were just it was a rumble. Some cops would call it 1013. Officers are down, come in, kick ass, and they're coming from Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, and then they had the nerve to say that we started the riot.
Right.
You basically bring cops in from
how
the
did
outer
it turn
boroughs.
out? It turned out that they couldn't say that because the next day they said it. Koch said, "If you take on our police,
Well, really
but
quick.
then
More about the riot, though.
I think it was Sunday. They started seeing the pictures of the badges covered.
Well, before we get to that, right, we're leading to that. So we had, luckily, 2 people with video cameras. Back then, video cameras were not as commonplace as they are today. So you had 2 people videotaping this, Paul Guerin and Clayton Patterson. If not for those 2 guys, I mean, millions of people were taking photographs, and those came in handy later for proof as to what the police did. But if not for those 2 videos were really defining, they really proved everything the cops were saying was a lie. For example, showing the badges covered. Cops beating up a homeless woman. This homeless woman had nothing to do with the riot. There was an implicit deal with the Parks Department and homeless people. Look, after a certain hour, you can come to the park, sleep, just get out before the sun comes up. So homeless people come there, old, young, and this little old lady's book. I watched it with a little cart, and the cops beat the crap out of her. She was just.
How about that guy?
She was just a moving target.
That famous picture is filmed where the guy is right before Paul is attacked. Paul Guerin, the videographer, when the guy's holding up the white shirt that's covered in red blood, and he's going, "This was a girl. This was a girl," and the cop just walks up to him, tells him put down the shirt, like rips the shirt out of his hand, and then starts beating him over the head. And then next thing you know, you see the guy with blood pouring off of his head.
There's so many bloody shots, footage.
It reminded me of something out of more like a European-style street protest or a South American-style riot. It's a very, the United States, as violent as things can get here, historically, we were a democracy of sorts. And as such, people usually don't fight with the police in the same way.
Even that evening, people didn't necessarily fight the cops.
Right.
It was more like yelling at them. It was
we're waiting for the next election to win and beat them in the next election. That's more the American style. In France or London, they had kings before, so when they go in the streets, they go in the streets to fight.
Oh, they fight.
They go in the street to fight. It's like we remember when there was a king hanging us from
They do spears.
Right.
They do crazy shit.
Exactly.
Okay,
it wasn't
US,
like that at all.
No.
But there was that one moment when it was like that, when he was holding up that blood-soaked shirt, and it could have been like Santiago, Chile, when Pinochet was like made a coup against the government and killed the president and all that kind of thing.
It was pretty surreal. To talk about it now is one thing. For people to see the footage and the photographs is another.
And, it was like out of a third world battle or something.
So initially we had positive press coverage where the press acknowledged, even Mayor Koch acknowledged it's a police riot. And initially we had sympathy. Oh, the police were out of control. What happened? Let's have an investigation. And then little by little, over the course of the following few days into the next few weeks, it became the tone of the mainstream media coverage shifted. Now, we were the provocateurs. We had started the riot. We made all those cops come from all those different boroughs and come to our neighborhood to beat the crap out of us. We goaded them into it. We were, in Commissioner Ben Ward's words, kids from Scarsdale, white kids from Scarsdale.
That was the next day's
So never mind that I
headlines.
lived there. I came from Scarsdale to provoke a fight with cops from Staten Island in my neighborhood. Yeah, okay. How did I do that? So as a result of the mainstream coverage becoming distorted and lying about what actually happened and eliminating the truth and deleting the truth, we decided it was time to resurrect the underground press as it had once existed on the Lower East Side. In the Lower East Side, we had really great underground newspapers. The most memorable one in my mind is the Rat, which is a great paper, the more radical of the papers. There's also the East Village Other Scenes, the Village Voice. There were several underground newspapers back then, but the Rat was the more radical. So
The Yipster Times.
the Yipster Times, Overthrow.
Right?
Yes.
Later
and
became Overthrow in the 80s,
those
but
are
in
great.
the 70s was Yipster Times.
Yipster Times, right.
And that was like a marijuana cultural paper, but it had some politics in it too.
Right, and those are all these great underground newspapers, and they were plentiful, and they were prolific, and they were wonderful, and then they kind of by the mid-'70s had drifted away, although Yipster Times did morph into Overthrow.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So there's somebody who could pay for it, but, it's expensive, as you're finding out. It's not cheap.
It was cheaper then than it is now, but it was in the 60s and 70s, it was pretty cheap to put out a newspaper.
Distribution was the most expensive.
Right, people have to go on the street. You're not going to
Yeah.
you're not going to get a major organization to distribute your publication. You have to
No.
go out on the street, grassroots style. Anyway, so we created our own newspaper, which covered the riot, thanks to people like you who you've been writing for us since the beginning.
Right.
We were actually able to expose the
think I had
people
the
that were
first
behind
cover
the
story.
riot and who had the secret meetings, the secret meeting list.
Yes.
And we were able to
We
expose.
published it.
Yes, we published in the shadow.
That guy who worked for the city kept attacking me every time he saw me. He started screaming at me.
But the thing is, they didn't want exposure, and we gave them exposure that they didn't want. And nobody else was doing it. The mainstream media refused to touch it. And so we've been basically doing investigative reportage ever since. And the stuff that the mainstream media won't touch
And
or
it's morphed into the other
underreport.
things. I mean, you've done lots of things way beyond. Like in this issue, the new issue that just came out, where do you get this?
Well, you can get
Where
it.
can you get it?
There's a couple of ways to get the shadow. I took the liberty of just printing this little thing up here.
Well, that might be a little too far away, but
I'm sorry.
We'll hold it closer. Let's see if we can hold it a little closer.
Well, we're sold on the Lower East Side in different stores. There's Blue Stockings on Allen Street. There's East Village Books on St. Mark's Place.
There we go.
There's, oh goodness, my brain's swimming. There's Ink on Avenue A between 4th and 5th Streets. There's
What is it? Ink, that place that you walk in and has all the different magazines and stuff?
There's a great place called Anti-Imperialist, Unoppressive Anti-Imperialist Books on Carmine Street. There's several stores around the community in Lower East Side that has it, but you can also get the shadow this way by mail, or you can send us an email and we'll tell you how to get the shadow locally. The bad thing about rents, let's say currently, is that rents are going up at such a rapid rate that stores that could carry alternative publications like the shadow and
Are disappearing?
they're disappearing. Bookstores are disappearing like crazy. Everyone's buying everything online. Everything is really changing for the worse now. In the 80s, you could put out a newspaper and you can get it distributed, and you didn't have the internet like you have it now. So people would buy the physical paper that you hold in your hand, which is, to me, still a wonderful thing. You should be holding, because your brain
I love it.
retains.
I mean, you can actually sit and read this and not be like all the people on the subway train, like leaned over and squinting at a telephone.
I think your brain receives and interprets and retains information on a much more permanent basis when you read it and take a mental photograph of what you're seeing, as opposed to bright lights on a screen.
And you can do things like this. I mean, this reminds me of the album covers. I hated CDs when they came out because it ruined the great big 12-inch album cover that we used to have. That was an amazing work of art often.
And you can pass these on to your friends. You can
Right,
keep it in the
right.
library. You can refer back to them in case you want to see
And
about
here's
the story.
Seth Bachman. He
Great
does
art by
almost
Seth
every
Bachman.
issue, right? This is the second issue in a row. He's done these big.
Actually, many issues in a row.
He's done
I
a
love
center,
his style.
a
It's just
centerfold,
wonderful.
a comic
that
centerfold.
stark black and white style, and he's always right on politically.
Right.
There's an interesting story about a man named Mumia Abu Jamal, who was a former Black Panther. As a teenager, he became a journalist, a kind of freelance journalist. One night I guess, I don't know the exact date, but in Philadelphia, he's driving a cab. He comes upon a scene where
Late
an officer had
70s.
been shot.
Yeah.
He was framed for the murder of a cop.
And they hated him because he was a radical radio reporter
Right.
for a local NPR station.
Right. Maybe if he worked for ABC or CNN, it would have been a
right,
different story.
right.
But the good news here that Seth is really putting out in a graphic
Form, yeah.
display is that there's a new regime in Philly, and the DA is no longer some right-wing administration. He's a more liberal person. He's not connected to the old regime that put Mumia away and framed him.
Frank Rizzo was the mayor.
Well, Rizzo was he became mayor later. He was a
Right.
police commissioner
Right.
that dropped the bomb
He was the worst
and
guy.
wiped an entire city block of
No, he was before that, but that was later. But that
wasn't Rizzo?
No, Rizzo, I don't think was mayor at that time.
No, he was
no,
police
it was the
commissioner.
African-American mayor at that time who was, Washington was his name, I think.
But didn't Rizzo as a police commissioner get the bomb dropped?
No, Rizzo was the mayor in the late 70s, early,
Right,
during
police
this
commissioner,
time.
didn't he drop the bomb as police
No, he
commissioner?
was already gone. He was dead, I think, by then. Yes, but there was a lot of other people like him.
Well, the fascism really knows no limits, and they just changed one administration to another, like same.
Yeah, it was for a long time. It was like that in Philly. It was extremely tribal, extremely racist. It was well known for that. Rizzo and the people who followed him. Then what they did is they elected a black mayor who was supposed to be a reformer, and then they bombed the MOVE headquarters. But Rizzo was the mayor at the time. They went after Mumia and the MOVE organization. The early attack on the MOVE organization, the attack that you saw on television in the 80s, where they dropped the bomb, was another attack on a later group of
I always thought
people.
Rizzo was involved, was behind that.
The first MOVE
okay.
That was the second that I know of. It might have been others.
Well, the good news here is as far as Mumia is concerned, he has a possibility of his case being reviewed because there's a new regime in Philadelphia, and a new district attorney who's not tied to the old political machine. That's a really good news thing, and Seth really graphically illustrated and explained it. It'd be really interesting to see like the Mumia life story as compared to the Hurricane Carter life story. You know, because Hurricane Carter was able to get out by having evidence presented, and Mumia's story would be equally interesting to see.
Right, so you can read this story how Mumia's new legal strategy to get released from prison.
And the new shadow, you can read that.
Yeah,
yes.
right. And you know, we have to say is self-defense is nothing somebody should be ashamed of if you're defending yourself.
What I like to see is more people putting out their own newspapers in their own communities. I mean, what we're doing here is no magic act. It's nothing really ultra special. It's special on the Lower East Side because there really are no independently produced underground investigative journalist newspapers in New York City that I know of. And I would not include independent in that category because they're anything but. But I think people in their own communities throughout the country, whoever's seeing this show, you don't have to be in Manhattan to see the show, luckily. You can see this on an archive basis or
That's
anywhere.
Eric Drucker's art, by the way, another great cartoonist.
It's really enjoyable to like create this, to read it, to see other people enjoying it. I think people in their communities should each have their own underground newspaper, at least get a collective, and expose what's going on politically and hold people's feet to the fire who are responsible for things that affect their community.
So what do people find? We got 5 minutes left. What do people find when they go through this issue?
Fast?
Yes, it goes very fast.
Wow, it's scary. Well, okay, geez, I'm sorry, guys. We just came to a roll here. Well, you can go to Shadow. Our email address is shadowpress@rocketmail.com. I don't know if people can even see this. Is this possible?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a Facebook page. You can get.
We
have up to the minute dispatches and posts on Facebook. You can get up to the minute news as well as events that are taking place that are coming up. We have 2 shows in Tompkins Square Park. Coming up on September 8th and 9th. It's a continuation of the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the 1988 Tompkins Square Park riots. There were more riots that followed the 88 riot that Paul and I just discussed a few minutes ago. We had riots basically on a regular basis, if not full-out riots, at least skirmishes practically every other weekend with police in and around Tompkins Square Park from 1988 to about 1991 when they closed Tompkins Square Park to do the ultimate demographic
Talk about
change.
Occupy, right?
So here this is just a little thing commemorating the riot of 1988 and the shows in Tompkins Square Park. We have a Facebook page called Shows in Tompkins Square Park. And if you go to that Facebook page, you'll see all the shows that are listed. Again, we have 2 shows, September 8th and 9th coming up, and there'll be more funny games. We just had 2 wonderful shows this past weekend on Saturday and Sunday. We had Norman Siegel
Beethoven, Brahms, and Bach.
Nothing that dry. A little more
wetter,
heavy. A little wetter and a little heavier. We had activist attorney Norman Siegel from the New York Civil Liberties Union. He had helped us in Norman Siegel, Ron Kuby, Stanley Cohen, Bill Kunstler, Lynn Stewart. All these lawyers really helped our political movement fight the police, get out of jail. We'd have their heads spinning. They couldn't believe how quickly we'd get the charges dropped, reduced, removed. We're back on the street. We're fighting them again. And all these lawyers made it possible. And one of those lawyers was Norman Siegel. And he was at one of our shows, the show on Saturday. It's just wonderful to have all of these people still politically active, still engaged in the struggle, still involved.
Right.
And it's a miracle that we're still actually
right.
doing this
And he
all
went
these
out.
years
He
later.
showed how few, despite all the people, 150 people who were violently attacked and 120 complaints, only 1 cop was actually suspended.
And was called a slap on the wrist.
Slap
Nothing.
on the wrist, right.
Paul Guerin actually videotaped these 2 cops beating him up while standing on a van to get a better angle of footage of riot cops charging
with
people
no badges and their
beating
badges
them.
covered and things like that.
And he was able to get so they're beating him. He's filming them beating him. They get him off the van. They're beating the crap out of him further. Clayton Patterson films it a little bit more while he's on the ground. The cops are taken to court. One cop's name was Skrizpek, and the other cop's name was Vecchi. Both cops were there. The judge, I attended the trial. It was a judge trial. They don't want a jury trial because they'll be found guilty.
Right.
The judge is literally, and then when it was all over, the judge went, not guilty.
He already had it decided.
Immediately, he woke up from his slumber and he was immediately not guilty.
Flash, how do you have a positive relationship with the police when you put on all these events in the park and yet at the same time we can sit and talk about them in this way?
Well, because the thing is, here's two interesting factors. We're kind of like veterans of a common struggle, a common experience. The few cops that are left from those days, we've got this respect between us. We've had this mutual experience, but also today's cops are not the cops of 1988. The cops of 1988 wanted to kick your ass, and they enjoyed it. And today's cops are a younger bunch. They weren't ingrained with the same gang mentality. It's like there are bad cops on the force, unfortunately, but I would say today's cops are much more mellow, milder. They're not being used the way cops back then were being used. And we have cops who are still around from 30 years ago.
They were used like gangsters in those days. They would just hire a bunch of people without much education and much training and give them guns and clubs and say, beat up the hippies.
But I say right now we have a really good, mutual, respectful relationship with
it's
the
a little more
police in our
professional.
precinct.
Even though you have these shootings of black people in the streets and things like that.
The 9th Precinct has been pretty cool on the Lower East Side.
Right.
It's not the same like you have.
So we have to come down to the neighborhood. The 9th Precinct in the Lower East Side is a little bit more sensitive to unusual and diverse populations.
I would say so, yeah. And again, the older cops that know us from the old days, we have this. There's a great, I'll make this really quick, there was a great little newsreel footage from like 1930.
Yeah.
And you had these veterans of the Civil War meeting in a field.
Yeah.
By that point, they're in their 80s and 90s. They got long beards, longer hair than me. And one group's got their gray uniforms, got their blue uniforms, and they come across the field and they're hugging. They're like, they're not good. They want it because they're all old. They had this mutual experience, and now they've come to have a respect for each other. They're survivors of this struggle, of this battle.
Half a minute to go,
Okay.
Chris Flash. Where should you get the newspaper?
You can go to 3 stores have it currently, and more stores on the Lower East Side are getting it very soon. The 3 best stores are Blue Stockings Books on Allen Street, East Village Books on St. Mark's Place, and Ink on Avenue A. More stores are going to get it very soon. Anti-imperialist, non-imperialist, 34 Carmine Street, and more stores throughout the Lower East Side. But you can definitely get us. Go to The Shadow Press. Oh, goodness.
At Facebook. All right,
on
great.
Facebook.
All right, great.
Sorry,
on Facebook.
man, I'm getting all
Good.
talked out
And we'll
here.
see you next week.
Thank you, Paul.